A plate of ribs, steaming hot, rested in Jason Statham's hands. The thick slabs of smoked meat glistened in rich sauce, the smell of hickory filling the air around him. He had just taken his first bite when it happened. A massive shadow fell over the picnic table, blocking out the soft glow of the string lights above. A large fist shot out from the shadow, snatched the plate of ribs from Jason's hands, and lifted them high in the air. Jason looked up, surprised, and saw Travis Riptide Griffin, a man towering over him. His eyes burned with anger. Griffin, who stood at 6'3", broad-shouldered and scarred from years of military service, glared down at him, his jaw tight with fury. Without saying a word, Griffin spat thickly, and the glob landed with a wet smack right on top of the ribs, the sticky mess sliding down the bone and dripping onto the picnic table. Gasps echoed through the crowd that had gathered nearby, shocked by the sudden interruption. Jason wiped sauce from his lips with a napkin, looking up slowly at Griffin. He didn't react with surprise or fear. His eyes, however, told a different story. There was a flicker of something behind them, a hint of tension, but Jason didn't blink. He didn't move. The crowd froze, holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Phones were pulled from pockets, screens lighting up in the dim light like fireflies. A kid whispered under his breath, "That's Jason Statham," and his voice barely broke the silence. But no one dared to speak any louder. Griffin's voice broke the silence like a crack of thunder. "You stole my life, you fake," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You cost me my career. You think you can play soldier, huh? Let's see if you're really tough enough to back it up." Jason didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He stood still, his hands at his sides, but something behind his eyes had shifted. It wasn't fear, it was a controlled anger, a calm determination. Jason's calmness only seemed to fuel Griffin's rage, making him even more furious. Griffin leaned in closer, spitting more venom into the air between them. "You think you're tough because you ran a sealed demo? That course was mine, my command. You humiliated me, Statham. You humiliated me in front of everyone, and they laughed at me. The SEALs laughed at me." Jason's eyes narrowed, but he remained silent. His breath was slow and steady, his mind calm. He exhaled through his nose, then slowly wiped his hands again, as if to remove any trace of the interruption. He didn't take his eyes off Griffin. Without saying a word, Jason tossed the crumpled napkin onto the ruined ribs. His voice, when it came, was cool and measured. "You're a long way from earning that," he said quietly. Griffin's grin widened, a dangerous smile that stretched across his face. "Oh, so now you're gonna act all tough, huh? You're afraid to fight Hollywood? You think you're too good for this?" Griffin's words dripped with contempt, and he took a step back, spreading his arms wide, clearing a circle in the dirt around them. "Right here, right now, Statham. Unless you're just another actor hiding behind edits and stunt doubles." Jason's jaw tightened, but he still didn't respond with anything more than a small nod. His eyes locked onto Griffin, no fear, no bravado, just raw, quiet fury simmering underneath. Jason stepped forward without hesitation. It wasn't a dramatic move. He didn't puff out his chest or try to appear stronger than he was. It was a simple, deliberate step, and in that single motion he showed that he was ready. Ready for whatever Griffin had to offer. No fear, just focus. Before the confrontation could continue, the voice of an unseen announcer blared through a loudspeaker. "Before we proceed, don't forget to like and subscribe to Jason Statham's epic face-off with the angry Navy SEAL. And make sure to comment where you're watching from today." The words cut through the tension like a sharp knife. The heat of the night clung to the city, heavy and oppressive, like a second skin. It was one of those scorching July nights in Los Angeles when the air smelled like hot pavement, car exhaust, and the sweet, smoky aroma of barbecue. The street food festival was in full swing, taking over an entire parking lot near downtown. Food trucks lined the edges, offering everything from ribs to tacos, teriyaki skewers to greasy fries. The music from a distant stage thumped through the air. A steel guitar strummed in the background as beer vendors called out their deals over the chatter of the crowd. String lights stretched above the parking lot, casting a soft glow on the excited faces of families, couples, and groups of friends who wandered the lot, grabbing food, laughing, and snapping photos. The smell of charcoal smoke filled the air, adding to the lively atmosphere of a typical summer night. In the midst of all the chaos and excitement, there sat one man alone, eating quietly. Jason Statham wasn't here to be seen. He didn't want attention. He wore a black cap pulled low, a jacket that had been worn soft by time, blending into the crowd like any other lone diner. He wasn't there to be recognized or to entertain anyone. It was his night off, a rare opportunity for him to enjoy some good food in quiet. He sat at a splintered picnic table near a taco truck, holding a plate of ribs in one hand, a cold bottle of water in the other. He wasn't looking for conversation or selfies. He just wanted to eat his meal in peace. The smell of the hickory smoke reminded him of old diners on the back roads in the UK, places that only the lucky few find when they're lost but end up exactly where they're meant to be. People passed by, some giving him a second glance, others not noticing him at all. That was what Jason wanted, just to be a regular guy, out for a meal, no cameras, no press, no egos. Just the simple pleasure of food, the warmth of the summer air, and the sound of quiet. But that peace didn't last long. Travis Riptide Griffin, a former Navy SEAL, had once been the king of the U.S. Navy SEAL training circuit. His name carries weight in the Special Forces. He was known for being fast, brutal, and tough, and his arrogance matched his skill. In 2018, Griffin's unit hosted a special closed demo for Hollywood consultants, actors, and stunt coordinators looking to prepare for military roles. Among the names on the list was one that made Griffin scoff: Jason Statham. An actor, a man who played tough guys in movies, but wasn't a real soldier in Griffin's eyes. But when Jason ran the Navy SEAL obstacle course, he didn't just pretend. He didn't run it for the cameras or for show. He gave it everything he had. He sprinted, climbed, crawled, and dove, finishing faster than most of Griffin's team. Word spread fast, and soon whispers filled the air. That actor, Jason Statham, he's more disciplined than you, Griffin. Griffin didn't want to hear it, but he did. His pride, already fragile, turned to poison. His arrogance grew and his temper snapped. Within months, Griffin was dishonorably discharged from the Navy SEALs due to too many outbursts. Now, Griffin worked private security jobs, bouncing at low-end clubs and guarding private events. His anger festered. He nursed the grudge like a loaded gun, waiting for the right moment. And when he saw Jason Statham sitting there at that picnic table, eating his ribs like nothing had ever happened, Griffin's rage exploded. He had been working nearby on a private security job when he saw Jason. The man who had destroyed his career wasn't in a suit or on a red carpet. He wasn't being flashy or showing off. He was just sitting there, relaxed like any other guy. And that made Griffin even angrier. The man who ruined his life was now enjoying a quiet dinner, free from the consequences of his actions. Griffin marched over, pushing past a couple holding churros, knocking over soda cups in his path. His boots pounded against the pavement. His eyes were locked on Jason, rage boiling inside him. "You cost me everything," Griffin shouted. "This night isn't about cameras or pride. It's about revenge, served hot and fresh, just like that barbecue." The ribs hit the ground with a dull slap, sauce splattering across the table, landing on Jason's boots. Griffin stood over him, chest rising and falling as he fumed. His spit still dripped from the ruined ribs. "Still pretending to be tough, huh?" he sneered. "You think a movie montage makes you a man?" Jason didn't react. He didn't jump up or shout back. Instead, he stood, slowly and deliberately. He wiped his hands with a napkin, then placed the plate of ribs gently into the trash can beside the table. The sauce dripped from his hands as he turned back to Griffin. "You've had 7 years to get over this," Jason said quietly. "You chose to carry this anger all this time. Now it's your problem, not mine." Griffin stepped forward, his face inches from Jason's. The anger in his eyes was clear as he glared at Jason. "You embarrassed me in front of my command," he growled, his voice sharp. Jason didn't flinch or back away. He stayed still, his expression calm and collected. "I didn't embarrass you," he replied, his voice steady. "You did that yourself." For a moment, Griffin blinked, as if Jason's words had landed harder than expected. He was used to being the one who controlled the situation, but Jason wasn't giving him that power. Griffin, visibly irritated, gave Jason one last chance. "Walk away now," he said, his voice low but warning. "This is your final offer." Jason didn't hesitate. He wasn't afraid. He didn't even raise his voice. Instead, he just stood there, giving Griffin the chance to turn back. But Griffin didn't back down. He laughed, a sharp sound that filled the air. "Final offer?" he scoffed. "What are you, a lawyer?" He took a step forward and shoved Jason hard in the shoulder. But Jason didn't budge. Not even an inch. He stood firm, his muscles locked, his gaze unwavering. The crowd around them began to gather quickly, like a magnet pulling them in. The area soon filled with at least 50 people, all eager to see what would happen next. Some climbed onto benches, others stood on coolers to get a better view. Phones came out, and the red glow of recording screens lit up, capturing every second of the tense moment. "This is real, right?" someone whispered, their voice filled with disbelief. "That's Jason Statham, isn't it?" Another voice asked, confused. "Who's the other guy? Some Navy SEALs? This is going to be insane." Nearby, a father quickly scooped up his daughter, pulling her back to safety. A woman clutched her lemonade tightly, her eyes wide, unable to look away from the scene unfolding in front of her. The air around them was thick with tension, but it was a strange kind of quiet tension, the kind that comes before something big, something ancient. It was the kind of silence that builds right before a storm or an earthquake, a moment before everything changes. Jason stood perfectly still in the center of the circle, his breath steady and calm. His fists hung loosely by his sides and his posture remained relaxed. He wasn't rushing to make a move, but he was ready. Griffin, on the other hand, was pacing, his body tight with anger. He was clearly trying to provoke Jason to get him to react. He shouted, "Let them see it, Statham. Let them see the truth. You're soft. You always were." Jason didn't change his expression. His face remained blank, unreadable. The crowd around them began to close in, their anticipation growing with every passing second. Griffin turned to face the crowd, raising his arms, his voice booming. "You all know this guy, right?" he yelled, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Big movie star, big muscles, action hero. He's been pretending to fight for years. Well, tonight you're going to see what happens when a real fighter, someone who's actually been in the dirt, faces a fraud like him." He turned back to Jason, his grin wide and wicked. "Fight me right here, no cameras, no crew, no scripts." Jason didn't respond, his gaze never leaving Griffin. Griffin took a step closer, leaning in. "Come on, let's see if you're really made of the stuff your movies pretend to show. You've been pretending to fight for 20 years. Well, let's see what happens when the real thing meets a fake." Jason didn't flinch. He didn't say a word. Instead, he took a deep breath and in a calm, controlled voice, he spoke. "Be careful what you ask for." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Griffin's smile faltered for a moment, surprised by the calmness of Jason's voice. He was expecting Jason to be rattled, to react to the pressure, but Jason wasn't giving him that satisfaction. Without another word, Jason slowly removed his jacket, folding it neatly and placing it on the bench behind him. His shirt clung to his strong frame, every muscle in his body primed and ready. He didn't need to show off, he didn't need to say anything. His movements were slow, deliberate, controlled. Griffin's laughter echoed through the air. "I'll make this quick," he said, his voice full of arrogance. Jason didn't respond. He just stood there, still as a statue, his eyes locked on Griffin. Griffin could feel the weight of Jason's calmness. It was unnerving. He was used to being the one in control, the one who moved first, but Jason was waiting. He was calculating. And that was starting to get to Griffin. Still, Griffin didn't back down. "Still got your Hollywood crew ready to save you?" he sneered. "You've been pretending to fight for years. Well, let's see what happens when a real fighter steps in." Jason's gaze never left Griffin's face. He didn't react to the taunts. Instead, he just waited. Griffin continued, his words growing louder. "I've taken down men twice your size in countries you can't even pronounce. I've broken bones before breakfast. You just memorize lines for a living." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I'm going to drop you so hard they'll call it your last scene." Jason's eyes stayed focused, his face calm. The crowd was starting to whisper, unsure of what would happen next. Some murmured he might actually lose. "That guy is huge." Others replied, "You don't know Jason. He's a real fighter." The tension was thick in the air and the crowd was waiting, holding their breath. Jason didn't need to talk. He didn't need to show off. He just needed to stay calm. Griffin couldn't take it anymore. He roared and lunged forward, throwing a punch aimed straight for Jason's collarbone. But Jason was ready. He didn't block the punch. Instead, he twisted his body just enough to let it slide past him. Then, in one smooth motion, he shifted his stance, low and balanced, his right arm coming up, not to swing but to calculate. The crowd gasped, feeling the change in the air. Griffin, not willing to back down, struck again. His punch landed hard in Jason's stomach, driving the air out of him. Jason bent over, gasping, but he didn't fall. Pain shot through his ribs like fire, but he stayed standing. Griffin wasn't finished. He grabbed Jason by the neck and drove his elbow into Jason's jaw with a sickening crack. Blood sprayed from Jason's mouth and his head snapped sideways. The crowd winced. It was a brutal hit. Jason staggered but didn't fall. Griffin grabbed Jason by the collar and threw him into a nearby picnic table. The table rattled, sending plastic plates and forks flying. Jason bounced off it, dazed but still on his feet. Griffin smiled, clearly enjoying the moment. "Is this what your director's chair feels like?" he taunted. Jason's knees buckled slightly. His eyes were blurred from the hit, but his hands stayed up. He was still in the fight. The crowd murmured, uncertainty creeping in. Griffin circled him like a shark, breathing heavily, his eyes wild. He swung a left hook at Jason's shoulder, spinning him slightly. Another punch came, this one wild and overhand, barely grazing Jason's temple. Jason stumbled but didn't go down. Griffin raised both arms in the air, shouting, "Told you, paper tough guy." The crowd cheered, but Jason was still standing. He wiped blood from his eye and lowered his stance. His shoulders were loose, his chin tucked, and he was ready. Griffin roared, charging again. This time Jason moved fast. He ducked under the right hook, slipped beneath the left, and then with lightning speed, he drove an elbow straight into Griffin's nose. The sound of the bone snapping was loud enough to make the crowd gasp. Blood exploded from Griffin's face and he reeled backward, his hands flying to his nose. Jason pressed forward, not giving Griffin a chance to recover. He kicked Griffin's left leg hard, buckling his knee and knocking him off balance. Another elbow slammed into Griffin's ribs, and then Jason twisted, driving a hammer fist down into Griffin's shoulder. Griffin screamed and stumbled back, swinging wildly, but Jason wasn't done. He grabbed Griffin's wrist mid-swing and drove his knee into Griffin's stomach. Griffin crumpled to the ground, coughing violently, blood and spit flying from his mouth. The crowd went wild. Gasps, cheers, and camera flashes filled the air as Jason stood over Griffin, victorious. The fight was over. Jason didn't stop. With a swift motion, he threw Griffin's arm behind his back, locking it in place. He grabbed Griffin's elbow with force and twisted it, the crack of ligaments snapping through the air like dry rope. Griffin howled in agony, the pain shooting through his body. The force of it was enough to make him feel like everything was falling apart. The fear started to settle in. He could feel his strength slipping away, draining like sand through his fingers. Jason was far from done, and Griffin was realizing just how deep his mistake was. Griffin swung wildly, a desperate instinct to land a hit. But Jason caught his wrist mid-swing, redirecting the punch and slamming Griffin's arm down across his own, knocking the punch completely off course. Griffin stumbled backward, his footing unsteady, barely able to keep himself upright. But Jason moved forward, unrelenting. Jason moved like a machine, calculated and ruthless. He didn't waste time. He closed the distance between them, lowering his center of gravity and driving his shoulder into Griffin's already cracked ribs. Griffin let out a wheezing scream, the air forced out of him as his body buckled from the impact. The crowd gasped in disbelief as Griffin fell to the ground again. Jason didn't even seem to notice the noise of the crowd. He grabbed Griffin by the collar, his hands pulling him up like he was nothing more than a rag doll. He didn't say a word, just dragged him back up to his feet. The fight had completely flipped. Where Griffin had once been the one dominating, now it was Jason in control. Griffin was struggling to stay conscious, let alone stand. Jason's next strike came swiftly. A precise jab straight into Griffin's sternum knocked the wind out of him. Griffin collapsed to his knees, hands clawing at the air, gasping for breath. His body was fighting against him, each movement slower than the last. Jason stood over him, eyes cold as steel, but there was no sign of emotion. He wasn't angry, he wasn't happy. He was just focused, controlled. But he wasn't finished yet. Jason wasn't the kind of fighter to let his opponent crawl away in shame. He stepped back just enough to give Griffin space to rise. He wasn't going to fight Griffin when he was already on the ground. Griffin had to stand on his own, or at least try to. And so he did. Griffin, one eye swollen shut, his nose crushed and his jaw hanging open, managed to rise. He was unsteady on his feet, looking like a man who had lost everything. Still he raised his fist. Jason could see it in Griffin's eyes. He still thought he could win. Despite everything, despite the beating he had just taken, Griffin wasn't done fighting. But Jason wasn't playing games. He didn't hesitate. Jason exhaled sharply, his breath steady but deep, and then the final combo came. Fast. First, Jason threw a left hook. Not to land a punch, but to bait Griffin into reacting. As expected, Griffin took the bait. He lunged forward, trying to hit Jason with everything he had. But Jason had already seen it coming. He ducked under Griffin's wild swing, spun around, and with perfect timing, drove his knee into the back of Griffin's leg, right into his thigh. Griffin collapsed to the ground again, his legs giving way. Before Griffin could hit the dirt, Jason was already there, his hand around Griffin's neck. He twisted, lifted him off the ground, and with a final surge of power, unleashed a bone-crushing right hook to Griffin's jaw. The sound of the punch landing was deafening. The force of it sent Griffin flying sideways, his body spinning like a rag doll, before hitting the ground with a sickening thud. The entire crowd fell silent for a brief moment. A beat of stillness like the whole world had stopped. Then suddenly the noise exploded. The cheers, the screams, the excitement, it all came flooding back in an instant. But Jason didn't react. He stood over Griffin's body, breathing in and out, his fists still clenched, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Griffin didn't move. His face was a mess of blood, his body sprawled out on the ground like a broken statue. Someone in the crowd yelled, "He's not breathing. Call medics." But Jason didn't flinch. He didn't look down at the man who had just been destroyed beneath him. He didn't feel a rush of victory or the thrill of winning. No, he just stood there, his breathing steady, his body bruised but solid, like a man who had already been through everything and didn't need to prove anything. Jason's expression was flat, neither proud nor angry. Just calm. He didn't gloat, he didn't smile. He just looked down at Griffin's broken body. Then without a word he turned. Jason walked slowly away from the scene, his movements measured, every step deliberate. The eyes of the crowd followed him. Every camera aimed at his back. They all knew they hadn't just witnessed a fight. They had witnessed something much more significant. Something different. Something that made them realize that there was power in being quiet, in being strong without needing to show it. Jason's presence was bigger than the fight itself. He wasn't fighting for glory, for attention, or for applause. He was just doing what needed to be done. As Jason walked past the circle of people, someone called out his name. "That's Jason Statham." Jason didn't acknowledge the praise. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just nodded once, slow and steady. His walk was calm, his head held high. The crowd could sense it. They knew that this was something bigger than just winning a fight. Jason didn't care for the applause. He didn't care for the attention. He was done. The crowd was still buzzing, still cheering, but Jason was already moving past them. He walked toward the food stand where everything had started. The vendor behind the counter was frozen in place, eyes wide in disbelief. He couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. Jason didn't say a word. He just pointed to the ribs again. Without hesitation, the vendor handed him a fresh plate, piled high with meat and sauce, steaming from the heat. Jason took the plate with a small nod of thanks and turned away. He didn't look back as he walked through the crowd. They made way for him, parting like water. His cap, which he had removed earlier, lay near the edge of the picnic bench where the fight had taken place. Jason bent down, slowly picked it up, dusted it off, and pulled it back onto his head. He looked one last time at the place where Griffin's broken body lay. Then, without another glance, Jason disappeared into the crowd. The sounds of the festival continued all around him, but Jason was already gone. No music, no cheers, no final act. Just the scent of barbecue in the air and the hum of life going on. Some people walk through life thinking it owes them something. They brag loudly about their victories and yell about how tough they are. But when the real challenge comes, they flinch. They back down. They mistake fear for respect and humiliation for justice. But real men don't chase fights. They don't need attention or a crowd to show their worth. They don't yell about how strong they are. They just carry their strength quietly, like a heavy burden that doesn't need to be shown off. Jason didn't come to the festival looking for a fight. He came for ribs, for peace, for a moment of calm. But when Griffin spat on his food, when he challenged Jason's name and disrespected everyone around them, Jason ended it. Not to win the crowd, not to prove he was tough, but to remind the world what real strength looks like. And here's the truth, ego gets loud, but honor stays silent. It only speaks when it's needed, when the line has been crossed. You don't get respect by being the loudest in the room. You earn it by carrying yourself with dignity, by surviving the hit and rising as if it meant nothing. Jason didn't leave the fight with a trophy or a medal. He didn't ask for the spotlight. But every person who watched that fight walked away changed. They didn't change because of the punches thrown, but because of how Jason carried himself. He didn't fight for attention. He fought because he had to. And when the silence needed to be broken, Jason was the one to do it, not with a boast, but with a single, undeniable act. Jason Statham showed the world that real strength doesn't need to be shown off. It speaks for itself when it needs to. And that's why Jason didn't have to say a word. His actions spoke louder than anything he could have shouted. If you like this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling adventures, mysteries, and unforgettable moments. Your support keeps these stories alive and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching. I can't wait to see you in the next video.